Oh, welcome to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. And I just want to say a few things before we get started, because whether you are listening to us on your phone, your laptop, or watching us on YouTube, we ask that you like us, or subscribe, or follow us, leave a review, and or become a patron on Patreon, because we're here to support you, and we hope that you will support this work going forward. We want to be with you on your journey for a long, long time to come. So welcome again to Your Spiritual Journey, and I'm excited to have Wyatt Melius with us today. I actually had not met Wyatt prior to this. I tried to. I was at a psychic fair, and Wyatt was there, and he had a line of people wanting to participate in what he did, and I had to find out, what's that guy doing over there? And I'll let him tell you about what he does over there and going forward. But he is the founder of Pittsburgh's Rooted in Sound. And if that sounds intriguing, there's a lot going on right now in that field. It seems to be getting more and more popular. I get emails almost daily about people offering sound healing in one form or another, online or in person. And I have yet to participate in that, but I know that we are all energy, and everything is energy. So it makes a heck of a lot of sense to me that the vibration of sound would help with that energy flow. So I'm not going to talk any more about that, and we'll let Wyatt start with his spiritual journey, because we want to know how he got to this point, not just hear about what he's doing right now. So Wyatt, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. So, my spiritual journey has been one of a lot of twists and turns. And just quickly, what I was doing there at the fair was we were doing what we call a chakra assessment. I trained with Dr. Colreet Aubrey in Siddha and Ayurvedic medicine and how sound relates to those two things.
Wait a minute. What kind of medicine?
Sound medicine. Oh, before that was Siddha or Ayurvedic medicine.
Ayurvedic.
Ayurvedic medicine is a branch of Siddha medicine. So those are ancient medicine techniques, very similar to Chinese medicine, but they're from India. Where traditional Chinese medicine is more from China, but they have very related roots and concepts. So they're very similar. Right. Only one's more based from India and the other's based from China. So when I went through that training, we learned how we have these sheaths or bodies, and we have our physical body, we have our emotional, mental body, and then we have our spiritual body. And even though most of what I do interacts with the energy body or spiritual body, I myself am not psychic. I don't see colors. That part of me is not developed. What is my empathy and intuition. So what I do is I look at, based on Siddha medicine or Ayurvedic medicine, what's going on with their body, what's going on with them emotionally, and then that tells me what's happening with them energetically based on the chakra systems, meridian points, flows of energy, and what energy centers govern which physical attributes or emotional attributes of our body. So that's what I use to get an idea. And then from there, we use sound just to bring that all into harmony. So that's what I was doing at the fair in little mini sessions, and why so many people were so interested in that.
Okay.
So how did I stumble onto this,
how'd
right?
you get to where did you start?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I come from a really strange background. My parents, my father came from a family that had extreme addiction and abuse. My mother came from a background where there was much love, but there was a lot of disconnect. Hoarding, a lot of emotional eating, and my mother's side of the family is all overweight, and they both grew up with extreme dysfunction. And when they were both 16, they were friends. They had this group of friends. They were all smoking pot in their little town on a bridge. And this person in this religious organization, cult of some sort, approached them and started preaching the word of the Bible and their interpretation to them. So my parents converted at that time. Before they were together, they were just friends. And
so where are we? What state? What city?
yeah, this is in Nantiglow, Pennsylvania. Okay, so about an hour and a half away near Ebensburg. A little cool town, very, very small and dismal. At that time, there was a slag heap that just kept smoking right outside the town. It's very much that coal mine town.
Yeah.
Right. It was, they found this religion, and I have to say that the religion did save them. And it gave me, in my early childhood, a really good spiritual foundation as far as understanding of the Bible, understanding of spiritual principles. And in my early life, it was really beneficial. It also saved me from the perpetuation of that abuse that they were experiencing, right, as children. So I'm very thankful for that. So growing up in this organization, I was always a people pleaser and felt like I needed to please my parents. I needed to please the people within the congregation. So by 18, I was an ordained minister, giving, little sermons in front of ballparks full of people, 10,000 people at a time.
Wow.
Going and preaching the word door to door, and very went through their training programs for the Bible. Probably by the time I was 18, I read the Bible seven to 10 times.
So is there a name to this organization?
Well, there is, but the story becomes murky. So I'm going to leave that name out out of respect. So, I'm engaged with that. Though the part of that story that is the murky or the dark side of that is I'm gay. So in going through that, which was not accepted by that congregation or that group.
Or most congregations at that time, sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of self-hate. There was a lot of denial. I was literally trying to pray the gay away at that point. So there was a real wrestling. And I remember, being 22, I had moved away from that congregation and settled myself in a congregation of the same religion. They're all very connected here in the Pittsburgh region. And I remember at 22, me telling my mother, if I detach from this organization in any way, if I am not like full force 100%, I'm not, it's not going to work for me. And there was a lot of pressure at that time for me to, I had went to school. It was find a job. However, as a minister, I was required to put 90 hours a month in preaching. So doing that with a full-time job was difficult, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So I had to get a full-time job. And I remember being 22, detaching from the organization a bit, and I was overweight. I had been overweight since first grade. I hated myself because of, who I was. The praying the gay away was not working. And I was not accepting or loving myself. So I remember feeling hopeless. And even though I came from that really strong spiritual background of a lot of Bible study and a lot of, you would think that those spiritual principles would carry over into that. But because of that framework, it didn't. So at 27, I had some things happen in my life, many things. I was working at UPMC as a IT specialist. At this point, I was extremely overweight, about 340 pounds, 350, somewhere in that range. I was 25, 26. I was starting to reach out to make gay friends and meet people and pulling away even more from that organization. And I was just a mess. I did not enjoy my life. So at 27, I left that job, came out, left the organization completely, wrote a letter, disassociating myself with that organization. And this was big because in that organization, to disassociate yourself from the congregation does mean being shunned by the entire organization.
Yeah.
So my community, my social group, everything up until that point was gone. So, it was a big transition. However, I stopped hating myself, and accepting who I was and I wasn't ready to accept spiritual life at that point. I was very spiritually abused, but starting to accept, who I was internally and starting to love a component of myself that I feared and hated and tried to drown, changed my life. I did lose weight at that point. That was the first time in my life that I had lost weight. I moved in with a friend. I walked into this little gardening store and I'm like, are you hiring? Because, she's the woman that was at the store was like, you do have a strong back? And I'm like, okay, sure. And I started working for the company, which I then became a partner of, and it was a sustainable landscape design build firm that started out as a little garden boutique here in Shadyside. And that was the beginnings of me starting to, again, accept myself for what I was and start to do something that had a greater meaning that was in alignment with who I was. And for me, that was, sustainable and organic landscaping and, with the mission of changing the planet 1 yard at a time,
Sure.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere.
Exactly. Through that, though, because I was not working on my spiritual life, right? I was getting involved in finding a new community, making new friends.
Some people would say gardening is a spiritual life.
Gardening is a major component to my spirituality, but I wasn't accepting it as such at the moment,
Sure.
It was I was making money. It was purpose. It was things of that nature. But it was later in that process, I had gained all my weight back. So this was over years, of doing the landscaping, working. At this point, I had many employees. It wasn't me digging in the dirt anymore. It was me behind a computer screen, right? Um, many clients, and navigating the employee-client relationships, and it was extremely stressful. And I had a community, but I did not get a sense of community like I needed, that I grew up with as a child. So I started drinking, and which was a very big part of the culture. In 2012, I had a gastric bypass, because at this point, I'm 400 pounds. Gained all that weight back plus, right? So I'm 400 pounds, I'm drinking, I'm working. And my drinking wasn't, at that point, I would not call it an addict behavior. It was more of a social behavior. But after the gastric bypass, I started to lose weight. And my relationship with alcohol then changed. Back in 2012, they didn't have a complete understanding of what gastric bypass did with alcohol. Today, they have a much better idea. But it's essentially one drink, and I was extremely drunk. 2 drinks, and I'm passed out in the corner. It was because it's like, it literally bypasses,
Right.
and it's straight into the blood system. So I'm losing all this weight because of the medical intervention. And I'm still feeling very disconnected. And a therapist that I was seeing at the time asked me if I would consider doing yoga to connect with my body. Still feeling very disconnected spiritually. I did not want to accept a concept of God because it hurt, right? Yeah. So I was willing to try the yoga, and it was so interesting. I'm like, I was afraid to go to a yoga class because, I'm losing weight, but I've never like active, like, I can dig a hole, but you want me to go like do these, at the time, strange moves and weird things. I wasn't ready for that. So I was looking for a private teacher. And at this time, Meetup was really popular, the website Meetup for meetup groups. And so I was looking for a meetup group and just looking for teachers. And there's this woman, she's holding this tree and she's smiling with this blonde hair. And I'm like, that's my yoga teacher. She's hugging a tree.
Perfect fit for you.
Yeah. And I have to say, at that moment, it was perfect. It was Kundalini Yoga. I had no idea what that was. I would say at the time she was teaching what I would consider Kundalini light. So it wasn't heavy into the Kundalini indoctrination, because if it was, I would have been running.
Yeah.
Right? Growing up in one cult, and then, So, but it was just the right level of starting to activate myself spiritually and connect with my body in a way that I hadn't done.
Yeah.
And I spent about 6 months training with her and starting to take classes. At a fair, I had met Michael and Galina Tamburo of Crown of Eternity, and they did a sound session on me. So this is now 2012 is the surgery. This is now about the end of 2013, timeline-wise. They do a sound session on me where they put the singing bowls on my body and they start tapping them, and then they play the gongs around my body. And I had never felt something like that before in my life. And it wasn't the sensation of the sound. It was because of the sound and the sensation, allowing my brain to release and go into a meditative state. It was the first time in my life that I was able to slip into that state and recognize what it was. And that's, to this day, I believe where the magic is, and what I do is allowing, we call it acoustic induced meditation, allowing the sound to shut all of those processes off in the brain so that we can go into that parasympathetic mode, into that rest and digest mode.
What was the deciding factor that made you try this?
Yeah, I mean,
that's my curiosity.
There's these really shiny bowls there that they're hitting, and these big, beautiful pieces. There was just something about, and to this day, those instruments are magnetic. You see them, and you're just drawn to them.
Yeah, I saw that at the psychic fair. You had those there, and boy, people could not stay away.
Yeah, and I think that there is a power in those instruments. I know that there is. There's been some studies done. I studied with a gentleman out near Philadelphia, Mitch Nur, who's he's a historian, professor of history, and he's done a lot of studies on the gongs and what they do, and it's fascinating of what sound does energetically, but more importantly, the most important part is what happens when we go into that meditative state. Because I believe that there's power in the gongs and there's power in the bowls, but I think the magic is in the individual. It's in the person healing. Their body is the miracle. And if they can allow their body to do what it needs to do, we can allow ourselves to slip into that state. Miracles happen. The people used to go to church once a week, and it was a much more sacred thing, and to be able to just let go and have that spiritual experience. People would celebrate the Sabbath, where you would take that time to really to your rest day to go into a meditation. So I think that a lot of those practices are hardwired into helping us, but we as a society and culture just have gotten so far away from that because of how busy life is. Yeah. So it literally changed my life at that moment. Just that one session, I'm like, why don't people know about this? So I started studying with Mike and Galena, studying the bowls, doing more yoga with them. My relationship with yoga changed dramatically after that session too. Before it was like, oh, you have to sit like this, and is this right? And I don't know, this doesn't feel comfortable. I can't do what you're doing. After that session, it was like, oh, well, now I can start to feel my body in a different way because of how I felt the sound. It connected me to my body in a different way, in a more subtle way. So all of that, everything just started to blossom. Right around that time, and this was 2014, I'm training, I'm learning all about sound, I'm learning, doing more yoga. I went to a Satnam Fest in Waynesboro, PA, and I had never done anything by myself at this point. Like, I wouldn't go out to eat alone. I didn't try. The idea of traveling alone was like a foreign, like I couldn't do it. So this was the first time that I chose to do something on my own.
Okay, I need to ask you.
Yeah.
Did you say a Satnam Fest?
Yeah, it's Satnam Fest. So
SATNAM.
And this was very popular in Kundalini Yoga right around those years. And it was a yoga and musical festival that was centered around Kundalini Yoga. Satnam means true self. in Sanskrit. So
Right. I'm writing this down because I will have reference to things that you talk about on my website,
okay,
so
excellent.
that people can look these things up.
Yeah,
So when I interrupt you like that,
absolutely,
it's for a future purpose.
absolutely.
Okay.
So I left to go to the Satnam Fest, and on my way I turned around 5 times to come home, and made myself turn back around to go. I was I was facing my fear in a really real way, and I got there. And then there's all these people dressed in white, and they're wearing turbans, and and I was aware that was going to be the case, but I didn't know that I was ready for it.
You didn't bring your turban.
I did not, and it was really like half the people there, but in my mind it was everybody, right? Because
sure.
I was not.
Uh-huh.
And so I got there. I hurt my leg. Maybe the day before while I was gardening, I pulled a muscle pretty badly. I got there, my leg was hurting. I did this yoga thing, and was like I was sore. My entire body ached. When I started there, went to bed and woke up the next day, and they start at 4:30 in the morning, and started the practice. And so they have their main practices, their main groups, and then they have kind of these breakout things. And there was what I thought was a workshop. And I just didn't understand. I don't know Sanskrit.
You don't.
Well, at this point, I didn't know any of it at all.
Yeah.
So I go to this work, what I perceive as a workshop, and here it was their Gurdwara. So it was their the Sikh religious ceremony that they do every morning.
Oh.
And the ones wearing the turbans, they are Sikh. And a lot of the Kundalini tradition comes from, the Sikh religion, which is a sect of Hinduism. And they're singing, and they're passing out this little dough ball that's almost like communion. And they're going up, and there's this guy waving this wand with feathers on, and I was the only thing that kept me there was that Sanatana Kaur was singing, and she's one of the biggest yogic singers in that community, and I stayed there as long as I could, but I walked away from that, and I was completely I was scared. I'm like, this is just a cult. They're just trying to indoctrinate me into becoming a Sikh, and I was checked out, and I'm like, I'm gonna eat lunch. Lunch is coming up next, and then I'm gonna go home. And I grabbed lunch, and Mike and Galena were there, and they sat down beside me, and I'm like, I'm really freaked out. I don't feel comfortable about this. They explained to me that I walked into the Sikh religious ceremony, that it wasn't a workshop.
Wasn't meant for you.
Right, exactly. And that only half the people there were of that religion, but there were many people that were Christian, many people that were Hindu, that weren't actually Sikh. There was a mix, and helped open my eyes to the fact that everybody was not wearing a turban, and so I decided to stick it out. And I made a promise to them at that moment that I would stick it out. And the next day was okay. The last day, we did a rebirthing yoga session. And about halfway through it, I just started crying, and I cried for the rest of the day. It was a complete opening of myself spiritually, where I was finally ready to start to connect again. And I use some aspects of Kundalini Yoga in what I do, but I never became a Sikh.
Okay.
And
I'm so disappointed because I wanted to have a Sikh on this show.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's not me, but
Okay.
I think there's beautiful teachings within um, that religious construct.
Yeah.
As I think that there's beautiful teachings in all. I'm kind of the mind that I'm of all religions and of none at the same time. And so that was the opening. I remember, so during that rebirthing yoga session, I start crying. We're in the womb and I'm there in a fetal position with my legs up over my head and my arms in the air, and I just start crying. Somatic response, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we go through the rest, and I'm bawling there, and we're at the age of, in the process of this yogic practice. We're in the process of where we're 14, where we were envisioning ourselves at 14, and we were standing there and dancing to the music. And as we danced the music, we were supposed to look into each other's eyes as we passed each other and give each other love. And I approached this woman who was in her 70s, and she looks up at me and she expresses love and she smiles, and I saw the 14-year-old girl in her and just start bawling again.
Okay.
Yeah, it was magical. It was beautiful. It was spiritual. And I think that was the true opening of myself to learning about these different cultures, these different spiritual practices, and how I can take what will serve me and let go of what won't. Including some of the spiritual principles from the religion that I was raised in. Yeah. There are some principles there that I think are valuable and that I can appreciate, even though there's many that aren't.
Yeah.
And how I can let go of those. So, then I had this magical experience. And that was in August of 2014. In my business partner had already moved across the country. And
now this is a gardening landscaping
this is the
business,
gardening
right?
landscaping business. My business partner moved across the country. And the business isn't doing so well. So, I mean, it was doing okay, but we were struggling. So we brought in a consultant, and the consultant pretty much said to my business partner that she had to move back, or she had to take a buyout because it was too much of a financial strain to support someone across the country when there was no money being contributed, So she had decided to move back. This was in September, was the decision to move back. She was going to move back in right after Thanksgiving. And the week before Thanksgiving, she told me that she wasn't moving back, and she asked for, which at that moment in my life felt like absurd amount of money for a buyout. Yeah. And the idea of doing it on my own, again, I don't have a lot of confidence in myself navigating things on my own. I didn't like to do stuff by myself, including run a business. Yeah. I broke again, and that's when I started drinking a little more. For me, it was alcoholic behavior. I was finishing every night with 2 glasses of wine. Like I said, 1 glass and I'm drunk, 2 glasses and I'm passing out. And so for about 6 months, that is how I was living life. So having this wonderful spiritual experience, but then life shows up and gets hard, right? And so and I did not have, at that point, I still didn't have the tools. I was still learning tools, but I did not have the tools in order to deal with that. So the tool
Yeah.
that I had was alcohol,
Uh-huh.
you know? So 6 months later, um, in June, my mother has a terrible car accident, and she ultimately loses a leg. She was in the ICU. Again, because of their spiritual principles, she would not receive blood, and her blood count went down to a 2.3, her hemoglobin count, and so it was transfusion or die, and she chose to die. She did not. She actually lived through it miraculously, but she was in the ICU for a month because of it. Um, she, um, being faced with that, my business partner is, I'm coming to the conclusion that there's no way I'm going to be able to give her the amount of money that she wants for the buyout. She's upset that I'm drinking the way that I am and doesn't feel stable about me running the business out here. And two of my employees that were my main managers were concerned because I'm, here my mother is dying in the hospital and I'm, drinking, and they saw that I was cracking. So they sat down and talked to me, and so I started, I went to a outpatient program and started the program of AA at that moment, and started the path of recovery. And what was beautiful about that was the principles that were, in the 12 steps. Those were the spiritual principles that I was missing in all of that religious foundation. It was the application of everything before and how to apply those principles in a fairly simple way. It was, hard, but the actual, once you go, it's hard to make yourself do it, but once you start the process and you're going through the process, it's very simple.
Yeah.
And that opened me up the rest of the way. Those parts of my journey really allowed me to start seeking to form a connection with my higher power, with God. At the beginning there, because I was still a little edgy on God, because with the Kundalini Yoga, it was very easy to be universe and Gaia, and address it by all these other names. But now I'm forced to accept this and dive into this in the tongue, in the words that I had emotional baggage around, and some spiritual baggage, and to start to pull that apart and reform a relationship with God and with my higher power, and with the freedom that I don't need to define what that is, was amazing. And that, that really set me on the course to where I am at the moment. Because, I continued landscaping, but I opened Rooted in Sound in 2016, kind of as a side business. And I opened another little boutique store in Lawrenceville where I was essentially doing both things out of. We had the boutique store, then we had office areas where we had the landscape employees working. And one thing that I will mention, as I was going through that outpatient in the beginnings of recovery, the biggest lesson that I learned was to start to listen to source, listen to people that were giving me good advice and were helping me navigate things. And in going through that process, my partner, just because I was these people were put in front of me at that moment by Source. My buyout with my business partner ended up being $10,000.
Okay.
Not the hundreds of thousands that she was asking for.
Yeah.
And it was really just by, these things were showing up in my life and taking advantage of them. Mm-hmm. It was beautiful, right? Yeah. I really saw higher power source working in my life in a way that I never really noticed before. And so 2016, again, I'm getting all these blessings, but I still had another lesson to learn that I didn't know was coming.
There's always one more.
Right. And there always will be. Everything's going pretty well until 2018 when I get ill and I have to have another surgery. And the recovery from that surgery lasted about 4 months. It was 16 weeks where I could not work. I could not even function in a leadership position. It was very long, very painful. Had to be on pain medication. Involved skin grafts. It was a very difficult recovery. I was in the hospital many times afterwards with infections.
Yeah.
C. diff. Multiple things happened with that surgery that took me out. Yeah. So I did hire someone to run the business for me while I was gone. And when I came back, I was $300,000 in debt.
Oh my.
So, that was again, what the lesson was for me. And it was really, I knew that the landscaping had taken me as far as it was supposed to, but I had this thing in my mind of what it needed to look like in order for me then to sell it and move on to Rooted in Sound. I had this image of what it had to look like, and I was driving and forcing that image. And that image is what put me ultimately in debt. It wasn't the woman, yes, but I'm the one who chose her, right? I'm the one who chose that, who made that decision. And what was the lesson from that for me was, Source gives us this path. And the path isn't necessarily always the easiest, but it's there, and it's a path. When we see where we want to go and it's not along that path, we're willing to take out the machete and start hacking through the woods. And along the way, we get pricked with thorns. We get bit by the snakes to get to this thing. And we get to it and it's not what we thought it was, right?
Right.
Where if we just follow the path, the things that are given to us are beyond comprehension and things that we could never imagine being. And that was my big lesson from that, is that I have to follow the path. And so in 2020, I sold my business to my employees, the landscaping business, and decided to pursue Rooted in Sound in a bigger way. So I was given an opportunity to work with a harmonic egg for a couple of years. It's a healing modality. It's essentially this large egg that you get inside of, and it uses sound and light. I was also, before I started doing that, and again, from 2015 until 2020, I was studying. I became an instructor with the Peter Hess Institute. I studied with Peter Hess, who started a institute in Germany called the Peter Hess Sound Massage, where they use the singing bowls on the body. That institute has 23 academies around the world. One of the academies are here in the United States, and it's in Wisconsin. And I'm an instructor with that academy. I studied, I became a Reiki master. I studied Primus energy healing. I studied, with Mike with the gongs. I studied with Dr. Chaudhry, with in accordance with sound. Um, I studied with Manan Sharma, who makes all of the therapeutic singing bowls that we use in the industry in the United States today. So all the bowls that come from Silver Sky, that come from Meinl, that are used as therapeutic bowls to be on the body through any larger organization, all come from Manan in New Delhi. So I had a chance to spend a weekend learning and training with him, which was beautiful. Gina Armstrong, uh, who leads the academy here, the Peter Hess Academy here in the United States, she has this amazing background, with mantra and sound, and she has this amazing story. To be able to work with her and learn from her has been incredible. And to have her leading the Peter Hess Academy here in the United States has been truly a blessing. So I did some training and with her as well. She's the one who took me through the instructor program, to be more than just a practitioner, to actually be an instructor through the Peter Hess Academy and Institute. There's just been so many along the way. What I did learn in 2020 while I was working with the egg was that there was something missing. I understood the power of meditation. I understood the power of relaxation. But people would come, they would have a sound massage, or they would come and have a session in the harmonic egg. And now I use something called the vibroacoustic table, which is very similar as far as the results. You just don't have a gigantic dome around you. So people would come to these experiences and they would be moved. They would have something that would happen, but then they would stop and life would get in the way. And it reminded me very much of when I went to that yoga festival and I had this amazing spiritual opening and I cried for 24 hours straight, and it was like this beautiful experience. But yet I lapsed into alcoholism not soon after that.
Yeah.
You know, what's that disconnect? Why do we have these experiences but can't integrate them into our life so that we can carry them forward? And
you have the answer to that.
I do.
Okay,
Believe it or
I wanna
not.
hear that because I know I'm also a Reiki practitioner.
Yeah.
And that often when you're helping somebody through the ascension process, part of that process is the release of some of that really heavily buried stuff that makes you feel like you're going backwards.
Yes.
Like, this isn't moving me forward. This is going back. But it's not, because you're releasing that and you have to work through it to get to the other side. So that's always been, I guess, my sense of when we think we're relapsing. We're not really relapsing.
Right. Right.
So anyway,
And I think one of the things that I found is that, when I went through this spiritual experience, I didn't have the tools at my disposal to handle, what was happening in life in that moment.
Yeah.
Which is funny because when I found myself $300,000 in debt, I had the tools, and so I was able to, there was 2 weeks where I had sleepless nights and I had anxiety around it. And I'm like, what am I not doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm not turning this over. I'm not praying about this. I'm meditating, but I'm not actually giving the stress of this over to source. And when I started doing that, the sleepless nights went away. The situation didn't change. I worked through that over time.
Yeah.
but the emotional component to that, the anxiety around it went away. So, you know, now with a program of recovery, that gave me a lot of tools. That was really helpful. But I came across one of my friends, close friends. Her name is Cheryl Corson. She's also a sound therapist with doing sound massage with the Peter Hess Academy. And I met her in a training, and she later went to become a health and wellness coach. And through the board certification, there's the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches, and so she went through a program so that she could gain that certification. And she talked to me about it, and I could see the value of the coaching in relationship to people healing and having that, because I'm not going to take someone through the 12 steps that, you know what I mean? That isn't
Right.
an addict, right? Not that it can't work for other things, and it does. And I use principles from that, but I didn't know how to relate that to the general public.
Yeah.
And so I found the Integrated Institute of Nutrition in New York. And what was and again, every single time, these things literally fell into my lap. It was like, oh, you need the next thing. Here it is. Sometimes they fell into my lap for free. Sometimes I had to pay for them, but the information was right there. The Integrative Institute of Nutrition, there was two main components that really caught my interest about them. One is they taught the idea of nutrition as that we have our primary foods and we have our secondary foods. Everything that we put in our mouth, what we think of nutrition, is a secondary food. The things that are the primary foods, the things that we really are taught to coach around, are relationships, spirituality, joy, home cooking, because that's an important part, physical activity or movement, finances, career. It's these 12 pillars of life that once we find balance in them, the secondary stuff just happens.
Yeah.
So we, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, we're on the 12 pillars.
Yeah, the
nutrition here.
The 12 pillars, that once we find balance in those things, in spirituality and joy and relationships in our social life and physical health and physical movement and what our home is like, where we live and our surroundings. And once we find balance in all of those things, the nutrition, what we eat, just happens naturally. Yeah. So that was the first thing that really caught my interest about that program. The second thing that caught my interest was their teachers are Depok Chopra, Dr. Andrew Wylie, Lissa Rankin. The top names in the industry are the actual teachers in the program. And so being able to learn from them, most of the content is online, but then I did have the opportunity to go meet Depok and have some, question and answer sessions with him and same with Dr. Andrew Wylie, and get to know these people in a more intimate setting than just an online class was amazing. And again, and that was what I learned in that coaching program. Then later, because I'm in the process of going through my certification with the board, going through that process as well as what the board requires, it gave me all those components so that clients don't just come to me for spiritual entertainment, they actually come for growth.
So this certification, I want to get this straight. Is this the certification in health and wellness coaching?
It's health and wellness coaching. And again, it's really interesting because it's just a small component. That's we're not nutritionalists.
Yeah.
We don't
Right.
really tell people what they should be eating.
Right.
We're coaching them what holistic health.
Right. It's
Right?
definitely a wholeness aspect
Yeah.
and approach to it.
Yeah.
Sure.
So there's components of life coaching in there, and I would say probably more life coaching than what you would consider as a health coach or
Yeah.
but in those tools, to integrate them with what I learned through recovery programs and working with people in recovery, it's really been, again, Source every step of the way has just provided me those tools that I need.
Yeah.
And when I'm willing to follow the path and say, oh, thank you, Source, this is something that I need to look at.
Yeah.
If I ignore it, or I go see something shiny that I want instead, like, my business needs to look like this so I can sell it, or
Right.
or I need to be in this location in order for then that's when, that's when life gets really rough, right?
And I think that's something that we constantly need reminders about, because, our will is so strong. And, unless we can align that will with God's will, we go off the path, like you said.
Yeah.
And it's just so easy to say, oh, this is what I need to do to get the result that I want.
Yeah.
But if you can just say, this is what I need help with, and relax, you get the help.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's that concept of turning it over.
Yeah.
And acceptance. Those are, when we think about the, some spiritual principles. Willingness is a spiritual principle. The willingness to allow God to work in our life in that way. Acceptance that things might not look the way we want them to look.
Right.
There's all of those, and trust, faith, hope. That those are the things that allow us to walk that path with grace.
Well, I hate to do this, but it's time to end this
Yeah.
session. And it's just been so fascinating just to listen to your story. This did not go the way that I had thought it was going to go, or where I thought it was going to go. And that shows what I know. But it's just been fascinating to listen to your story. At the end of each podcast, I ask the interviewee to leave our audience with whatever words they would like to leave them with, that our audience will take what relates to them from this and discard the rest, and that's to be expected. But are there some words you would like to leave them with?
I would say yes. Change and transformation is scary. Initiating, taking the steps to do it, is the hardest thing to do. But the process can be joyful. Even as hard as it might be, it can still be joyful. So find the support that can help you go through it in a joyful way. Support is so important. People to go through that change to become who you truly are, and support you along the way. It's out there, and I see it in my clients. I've experienced it myself, that it can be a very joyful process, even though it's difficult.
Yeah, I love that. So, audience, you've got your message. Keep the joy in your life, and if it's not there yet, put it there. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey. Thank you for being with us.